So, if you didn't already know this, chaplains are ordained ministers who get their hands dirty, and they go to dangerous places. They work in difficult environments. And when I was in seminary, I learned early on that a chaplain's job is a often much harder job than being a pastor. Chaplains have to interact with people of all religious faiths or even no faith. You have to work in the midst of emotional crisis with people who are incarcerated, people going off to war, people in war. So in other words, it's a tough situation that chaplains are often in. And tonight we're going to be talking to Janet Horton. And Janet, so good to see you.
So good to see y'all.
Yeah, really, isn't that great? Probably some of you know that Janet is also the author of Cracking the Camouflage Ceiling that was published in 2017. And so tonight we're going to be talking to Janet, who was one of the very first, if not the first military chaplain, women chaplain in the Army. That could be no easy job, but Janet's story, which I think you'll see quickly, is one of incredible courage, persistence, forgiveness, and love. So let's just start in, Janet. I'm going to just sort of skip some of the background questions, but that I had. I just wanted to ask you here, what was it like to be one of the first women to be a chaplain in the U.S. military? And did the fact that you were a woman and a Christian Scientist meet with any theological skepticism from others? You laugh.
Yeah, the idea of women being in the military at all was pretty volatile at that point. For the chaplains and other branches, people said, it's my human opinion that women shouldn't be in the military, or it's your human opinion they should. But in the chaplaincy, they'd tell me, God told me you shouldn't be here. So it was a very volatile thing for the chaplaincy. And I think that for me, I had, been reading my Bible lessons since I was a child, and I loved that passage. It says, comfort ye, my people. And I heard in prayer that God was assuring me that he had given me intelligence to fulfill that purpose. And I had an experience in college. I was coming into this big room, and there were two guys in there, and they were dressed up like Native Americans, and they're going, rah, 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 rah. And one of them took this knife and pointed it at the other one and accidentally cut his finger open. And so I walked over to the guy and I took his hand in my hand and I said, would you be okay if I pray and stop that bleeding? Because blood was spurting. And he said, please do. And so I prayed with Ezekiel 16:6, and I passed by thee and saw thee polluted in thine own blood. And I said unto thee, whence thou wast in thy blood, yea, I said unto thee, whence thou wast in thy blood, live. And the bleeding completely stopped. And I was trying to find him to do the music for a dance that our house was having. And this was a reorganized Latter-day Saint Church College in Iowa. And so they said they could do it. And it was interesting because that night of our dance, he came and he kept saying to me, what did you do to me? What did you do to me? And somebody grabbed my arm and said, are you so stupid? Are you the only person in this college that doesn't know he's the biggest drug dealer on campus? And I said, no, I will never see him that way. And I told him, I said, everybody's saying that you're the biggest drug dealer on campus. And I said, I will never see you that way. And he said, why is that? And I said, you have a little puppy, Missy. And I know wherever you are in classes, puppy is waiting out front. And when you get done with your class, you come out and you take the puppy and you hold it to your heart. And I said, that's the man who you are. That's the man you need to be. And at this church college, it was a lot like Prim. Almost nobody lived off campus. And there was this one house where he lived in, and it was drug dealers and stuff like that. And he immediately moved out of it, moved into campus, because I told him I would talk to the folks, and they gave him housing and everything. And he stopped dealing drugs.
Mm.
And it was interesting because when I graduated a couple years before him. He called the mother church and asked them to link us up. And he told me that he had finally graduated. He'd become a brick mason,
Hmm.
and he was on a job, and a big truck came in bringing a whole new truckload of bricks, and it ran over Missy and crushed her. And he said that he immediately, because he then even started going to a Christian Science church and reading the lesson and everything by that time. And he went over to Missy and he just held her to his heart again. And he began to pray with her with what was in the lesson that week. And everybody was saying, that dog's dead, and everything. And immediately she revived.
Mm.
And so the reason he told the mother church he wanted to talk to me was, he said he felt like Missy had saved his life, because what I saw in him stopped him from being a drug dealer anymore. And now he felt God was had blessed him so much, because that he'd allowed him to heal Missy.
Mm. No,
So,
beautiful.
yeah.
You know, being in the military, can you just talk about your experience with some of the more difficult men that you had to run up against? I'm sure that you could talk about that for a while, but I'm just just some tidbits.
Well, when I went to basic training, there were two women. My friend Diana and me were the only two women of about 100 and some men. And they would say to her, Diana, you're never going to make it because you're Black and you're a woman. And they'd say to me, you're never going to make it because you're a Christian Scientist and you're a woman.
Mm.
And both of us never bought into that. And we both, she made lieutenant colonel and I made colonel. And other than the chief of chaplains, which is a 2-star, and his deputy, that's a 1-star. No woman to this day has made it in the Army Chaplain Corps to be a chief of chaplains, but it's, and I was asked to go speak about 5 years ago. They had the Women's Chaplains Conference for all the chaplains in all the military. And they were all it was a 3-day conference, and every speaker was screamingly angry, and everybody's crying. And I mean, they were just saying that they were treated horribly. And I shared some of my experiences. One of the chaplains in my basic course came up in my advanced course, because I'd been in by 4 years, about 4 years by that time. So I had 2 meritorious service medals. And that's because there were men raping men. And I found out about it and got it stopped at Oklahoma at Fort Sill. And then when I had my tour up on the DMZ in Korea, that the Korean guards were raping our women, and I got that identified and stopped. And so they gave me a meritorious service medal. And one of the male chaplains in my advanced course saw those 2 on my uniform, and he knew I only had 4 years in the military, and he says, you couldn't possibly
Hmm.
have deserved those, and he spit on me.
Really?
Yeah, and
What?
I just can't imagine anything I've ever experienced that felt that as disgusting as somebody just standing there and spitting on you. And
Okay, so what did you do?
well, I just immediately started to pray, and I said, okay, Lord, I'm listening to you, because I have no idea what to do at this point. And God said, what must a man have been through in
Mm.
order to bring himself to be able to spit on another human being? And the voice also said, the soldiers spit on Jesus.
Mm.
And he said, when you said you wanted to follow him, did you mean just in the easy footsteps? And I said, no, Lord, I'll follow him all the way to the cross if that's what's necessary. And so I just reached out, and the guy that had spit on me, I hugged him and I said, you know, what I said, what you heard me say, I can't imagine what you've been through in order to be able to bring yourself to spit on another human being. And what I think he did in a very emotional minute, I think the reality of what he'd done hit him, because you could see his face go, whoa, like this, you know, and his eyes get real big and everything. And he just fell to his knees and wept and begged me to forgive him.
Wow.
So that was a real turnaround in our basic course. And then I could run 9 miles and all the things they thought women couldn't do when they would see me do those sort of things. We had a 15-mile road march, and I was one. No men fell out, because normally 60 to 80 men fell out, but because I didn't, then none of the men did. And so, you know, the commander said, I'm going to run her up front every morning, and every time we have a march, she's going to be up front with me. So it just, but I thought, well, I'm glad if that's inspired them to believe that they can do those things.
Yeah. You know, what I was going to ask you, what exactly do you think was the turning point where things started to change in the military for you and other women, and what caused the change?
As you got more rank, then the other chaplains stopped having the authority to get you to the next rank then, and to get you more responsibility. And the regular infantry, artillery, any of the regular guys, when they would see what I could do, like finding that people were being raped and getting that stopped and all those kind of things, they wanted me promoted. So I was the first woman in the Army to be promoted to major. And then I made it to full colonel, but to this day, no woman in the Army's made it past full colonel.
That's amazing. As you probably know, that we have some volunteer prison chaplains that are on the call tonight, and some have met with theological skepticism, especially from the more fundamentalist groups. You know, they consider Christian Science, among other things, a cult. Followers of Mary Baker Eddy, and some consider that total reliance on God as kind of you know, impractical or illogical. And how did you combat this mindset, if it was there, to use a military term, and break it down so that we can see the steps that you might recommend?
Well, we would read the Bible lesson, and I think, first of all, I would explain, you know, we see the Bible as our pastor. We don't even look to another human being to be our pastor. And they were very moved by that.
Good point.
Yeah, and I said, when I shared this experience with them the first time I went into the prison, that one time in my second year in the military, a bunch of us chaplains were at a conference center at a remote area in Arizona, and we went out to do our morning run. And because I was the woman, they put me in the back of the formation, and so I didn't see the pack of coyotes coming, and the men did. And so there were 2 brick walls and 2 trees where somebody was starting a new development, and the men raced up and were filling up the trees and and the 2 walls, and the coyotes surrounded me. And as I prayed, what came to me so clearly was, all they can feel is that you love them. And I just could tell who the lead coyote was, because as they would circle, he'd growl and tighten in, and then they'd circle again, and he'd growl and tighten in, and the rest of them would tighten in, and they'd do that, and they'd done it about 4 times. And so I just went over to the lead coyote, got down on one knee, and when I got down on one knee, he laid down the way puppies do with their paws out front and everything, and all the coyotes laid down. And I said to him, in the beginning, God created all the beasts of the field. And I pointed right at his nose when I said beasts of the field, and he nodded his head. It was so cute. And I said, and God saw everything he made, and behold, it was very good. And I pointed right at his face again, and he nodded his head. And I said, but he gave you a purpose, and it wasn't to harm me. And he gave me a purpose, and it wasn't to harm you. And he nodded his head again. And I said to him, I said, but this isn't your right place. And because the whole circle of coyotes now jumped up. And I said, you need, because you've jumped up, now you go back out into the desert. And they ran off. And so we went back to the place where the chaplains were meeting for the conference. And they started calling me the Coyote Whisperer. So for 28 years, that was my nickname.
Wow. But I want to kind of ask a little bit more about that. And how did you combat the mindset, though, that you were a Christian Scientist, or was that not even an issue?
Well, I think when they saw me pray and they saw the value of, there were a number of things that happened in that first year or so. There were so many things that happened. And they'd always hear me say a Bible passage. And I would constantly bring up the fact that we saw the Bible and then our Christian Science textbook as our pastor, not just some human being. And we saw everybody as the same. And we truly believed that those Bible passages were Jesus' teachings and everything are just as powerful today as they have ever been. And I did one time. I slammed my hand in my car door and it was bleeding all over, and they saw me pray and it immediately stopped bleeding, and then there wasn't a mark on my hand. And so the more they saw those type of healings, they just begin to realize, wow, this isn't at all what people have said it is. And a lot of times we'd have discussions. A bunch of us were sent to the Amana colonies, and because we were studying that program and everything, and they didn't drive cars, and I mean they were very retro, and it was so interesting. They just couldn't ask enough questions about Christian Science. I couldn't stop asking them. And so for 3.5 hours, they asked questions. And by the end of that, I could barely speak because my voice was, worn out. And they said, well, one of the guys said, well, if you're a Christian Scientist, pray and heal your voice. And I just thought, and I said, you're right. And I just prayed, and my voice completely came back. So I think whenever people see an instantaneous healing like that, it's very powerful on them. And they stop thinking it's a cult. And because I always say what we depend on and what we look to is the biblical passage. It has to be a revealed source.
Yeah. What do you think is the primary purpose of a Christian Science chaplain? And of course, it seems like maybe self-evident to people, but what does it mean to you?
Well, I think that military chaplaincy is kind of a miracle because you don't see anything like it anywhere else. And what it is every chaplain, no matter where you are, because you're always in a unit by yourself. And so there's people in your unit that are all different. They could be 100 different Christian denominations.
Yeah.
You might have a Muslim, you might have, a Jew or whatever. And what your purpose is to make sure that every one of those people have their religious needs met. So at one of my units, the drill sergeants took a Christian science and health from one of our people. It took a Book of Mormon from a Mormon and a Quran from a Muslim. And I was the one that went back in and talked to the boss of that drill sergeant and explained and I didn't vilify him. I just said he misunderstood that they can't have books in there, but it doesn't say you can't have your religious scriptures in there.
Hmm.
And so I just said, I think we need to explain that to that drill sergeant. And he went, oh, I see. And so then I got calls from the Muslim Endorser and the Latter-day Saint people saying, thank you so much. Our people told us that you were the one who got them their religious books back.
Yeah.
So, it was I think that you don't see many places where people work that closely together, and the Muslims began to have me come out and teach their new chaplains, and they had
That's
did that for years and years.
that's amazing. Is there, in your view, a primary skill or practice that that one needs to master to be effective at comforting those in distress and pain?
I think is the most important thing I think you can understand is that it's not you doing it. And so
Mm,
I always talk about it because of the military. I always talk about it as um, I believe the people who are the most effective, whether they're a Christian Scientist or other chaplains that I work with, is if you have a problem that you have to face, or it's your responsibility to solve it, then I say I come to a position of attention spiritually.
mm,
And it's divine mind that tells us what to do. And it's always the thing that heals it and, gets people where they need to be in thought or whatever. And I think when people see that kind of change, and when they see, your hand doesn't have blood all over it anymore, and not even a mark, because I remember one of the people just kept taking my hand and saying, I saw the blood, but I
mhm,
don't see a mark on your hand. It's just so overcoming to them.
mm.
They see a physical healing like that.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Eddy said Jesus took away the physical evidence.
Mhm.
Um, Definitely what you did. What is a good starting point when talking with a person about Christian Science or metaphysics? Somebody, who just knows nothing about Christian Science or metaphysics. Where do you start?
Well, I usually start by explaining that we're a lay tradition and we see everybody as equal, and we all take the different responsibilities for running the services, being the readers of the sacred texts or whatever, and that we believe that it's the truth that heals, not the person. I
Mhm.
always like to try to explain that we're not seeing it as we're doing the healing. And so that, and then I often talk about how much healing went on even before Jesus came through prophets and, different people that are in the Old Testament. I said, but at that point, they were just depending on the 10 Commandments and some of those different things that are taught there. But if you look at the New Testament, I explained, you sometimes heard Jesus say, sometimes he would just quote the Old Testament, but sometimes he'd say, you've heard it been said, and quote it, but I say unto you, because it
Yeah,
said, love your neighbor, but hate your enemy.
yeah.
That's one of the examples I would use. And he'd say, but I say unto you,
Mm,
love your enemy. And then
yeah.
I would give an example of like the guy who spit on me and how I just hugged him and he fell to his
Mm,
knees and wept.
mm.
And, just if you can give an example of seeing that more spiritual understanding, that's been helpful.
Yeah, I,
And
I like that.
I'm sorry, I do always say, in Christian Science, we read a Bible lesson every day, and a lot of people will study it up to about an hour, as they're reading it. And that's one of the first things we do in the morning.
Mm,
I go,
yeah,
wow. Yeah.
yeah. So some of us know that on the day that the Pentagon was attacked by the terrorists in 2001, that you were on the scene and were able to help people, after the American Airlines flight exploded as it hit the Pentagon building. Um, Tell us about how that experience unfolded for you that day. And what was it like praying for people who were hurt or, I mean, just totally overcome by the event?
Um, well, first of all, for me, it started the evening before. because as I got off the metro at my house, I'd come home from the Pentagon. There was this huge bank of clouds and thunder and lightning all over, and I felt like I heard God say, and almost like he took my face and said, "Look at that." And I said, "Okay, you don't pray that that'll go around you and then hit somebody else. You pray that it would be dispersed and that there's no such thing as a, Mrs. Eddy talks about there's spiritual power and moral power, but there aren't any, physical or material powers, that they're not a power." And so I was explaining how I would start to pray about in a situation like that. And so then it was interesting, and it said, "No." The voice in my head said, "No, pray about the gathering of malice." And
Mhm.
so it was so serious and so, pointed that I spent about 2.5 hours that evening praying about, that what love is, and anything that talked about, healing hatred or malice or anything like that. And so that morning, I got pulled to the opposite side of the Pentagon because there was renovations going on.
Yeah.
And our office had been right where the plane hit. But we'd already been pulled out of there, and because of the renovations, and we were down another colony. There's like these columns and everything. And so we were down another row. And then that morning I got pulled to the dental clinic, and the lady called me right before the plane hit, and she said, I lost your my birthday's 8/11, and so they always call you on your birthday and say you got to have your teeth looked at and declared deployable." And so in 9/11 she called me and she said, "It's weird, your thing got lost on my desk for 1 month." And she says, "You got to come over here right now." So that
Mm.
pulled me to the other side, because when I got back to my office, the whole ceiling was down on my table and chair and everything, and it was pretty much a mess in my office.
Mhm.
And that put me in the place where where all the fire and rescue workers and medical workers were coming to help us. That put me on the opposite side of the Pentagon, and so um, there were two other chaplains, and they were both both of them were minority chaplains too.
Mhm.
And so the security guards were getting everybody out of the Pentagon, and they were right at the doors. And so we went in with the medical people, and the head of security said, "You're not going in there, chaplains. Only these medical people are." And I knew him because on Christmas and Thanksgiving, I would always bake them cookies and homemade bread and stuff. And I said, "Now listen, I know that you know me." And I said, "This is doctrinal. I can give you the regulations, and we have to be in there to pray with those casualties." And so only the three of us were the only three chaplains who got
Mm.
into what was called ground zero, the middle courtyard, which was where they were bringing out the people who had been hurt. And what's interesting was uh, the pilot didn't know what he was doing, because he just had a tiny bit of training. And there was a big light stanchion, and it made the nose of the plane go down quickly, and it hit right where that renovation was happening. So there were no people in there. And I think the number of casualties was less than 200, and there's 24,000 people that work in the Pentagon.
Mm.
And a 100, and I think 70 of those were on the plane. And so
Oh,
there
wow.
was, it was just a handful of, compared to the thousands of people in New York City.
Mhm.
And so they were bringing out people and laying them on the grass in the middle courtyard. And it was interesting that morning, it had also occurred to me to take my Bible lesson with me. And so I was kneeling and going from person to person that they were laying on the grass. And everybody really calmed down when you started to pray with those passages from the Bible lesson. And this one guy, he couldn't move his legs. he jumped out of a second-story window onto the cement sidewalk, and he couldn't move from the waist down. And so he kept saying to them, I can see what you're doing, but I can't feel my legs. I can't. And he was just so out, just screaming and yelling and everything. And I walked up to him and I said, now you said you wanted to pray, because in the military, before you pray with somebody, you have to ask them if they want to pray, because they have to agree that that will be the case. And I said, you said you wanted to pray. Now I want you to just calm down and I want you to listen to me. And I said, nothing can separate you from the love of God, not height, not depth, nor things present, nor things to come, nor principalities, nor powers. And he calmed down completely.
Hmm.
And it was interesting because right then they said, we got to move people out of here, because they said there might be another plane coming. And right then he started feeling his legs. And he was moving his legs, and he they moved him out. And he was back in less than 2 weeks.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's a
So
great story. I have a feeling you could probably talk a lot about that, but I just want to also ask you that most Christian Science volunteers who either write to inmates or visit them in a prison are dealing with character issues of sin or vice that brought an inmate's imprisonment. These issues, you know, that they're different from healing a case of illness, for example, involve the need for remorse, repentance, reformation. So in your experience, how do you help someone uncover what Mrs. Eddy calls hidden sin, those character traits an inmate is mostly unaware of?
what I usually start with the people, and I've done this many times at our prison here in the correctional facility here in Ocala, is I've always started with Mrs. Eddy's statement that man has a noble destiny, but we have to accept that that is what our destiny is. And that, and it's interesting because immediately the inmates say, nobody's ever said anything like that to us before.
Hmm.
And that that even growing up, they were called crap and, you know, also, I won't say all the words they'd say, and so I explained that once they can understand who they truly are, then they can recognize that that sin is no part of them. And then, it's, we've had one of our guys came for, I think it was about 3 years, and then got out, and he's been at our church now for probably over 10 years at least. He's on the board of our board of directors right now, and he's just he's started a business, and he's helped other people who've gotten out of prison, you know, to work in his business, and he's seeing progress in them as well. And so I think people have to understand that no matter, I think it's what's called animal magnetism, Mrs. Eddy says, and she defines it as the repetition of evil. And so I always try to explain to them that that's very hypnotic when people have to hear, you're a piece of crap, you're horrible, you know, you're blah, 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 you know, all this. No matter how many times somebody said it, if it's false, then it can't have any power and it can't be true. I mean, I love Mrs. Eddy's idea about that, and explain that to it. I said, the moment you understand who you truly are, and I said, you know, there was only one creator, and God saw everything he made, and behold, it was very good. And it even talks about man and woman were made in God's image and likeness. And so that's who you truly are. And you can recognize that, and you can find that in yourself, and you can give up those things that aren't true about you. And it's interesting. We've had a lot of progress in our group out in the prison.
I would love to hear more about that. And let's do that sometime soon.
Okay. Well,
You know,
can I share one piece of that that's
oh,
been important,
please.
I think, too? we often talk about, no matter what you feel like you're going through, there is somebody in the Bible who went through a similar experience as you. And so we teach them what a concordance is and how to look up, is it self-hatred or, whatever it is, if they can look up the passages that would apply to that. And then that they have to understand that when they see the truth of those passages, then that's what heals them. It's the truth that heals. And we've seen tremendous progress that way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. In many places across the United States, as our Christian Science volunteers seem to be kept out of prisons because of some conscious or unconscious discomfort with our group. And the arguments are that we're a small denomination with a few Christian Science inmates asking for help. So you're not really needed here. Another reason is not always spoken is because we don't preach that Jesus is God or that, that man is a hopeless sinner. So if you could crack open the camouflage ceiling, then what do you suggest needs to be done to crack open the prison doors for Christian Scientists to enter into more prisons?
Well, one thing that people don't understand is there's over 200 and some just Protestant denominations. And so it's hard for them to think that they could have 276 different Protestant chaplains in there, a priest and a Muslim or whatever. You see what I'm saying is that it's not realistic to say that no matter who you are, we have to let you in here. So the prisons we've always worked with, there has to be an inmate who asks for that type of service. And so we have always gotten in because there's been a inmate who's asked for that kind of purpose or that kind of service. And then once we went into our prison out there, they asked me to talk to the big group because there's a big group that meets in what they called the big room. We just had a little room. And then more of the people from that started coming to our service. And so I think the more the word gets out there that, this makes sense with these people, and they're not telling me I'm a miserable sinner and that they have a noble destiny, but they have to understand, that they must recognize that themselves, and they must understand that as their spiritual identity. And so it's kind of like, tell me the meaning of life, but could you do that in 10 words or less? So we explain, that that's why we have people come each week, and because we really want to walk them through there's so many layers of the things that we need to learn as Christians. And
right. We're a little past the hour here. What I'd like to do right now is just sort of open it up to the audience. I know we can't take a lot of questions, but if somebody wants to ask a question, why don't we? We're getting a lot of hands. Gabriel, why don't you take the lead here and invite somebody to ask a question?
Sure thing. Why don't we start with Heather B, since you look like you got there first. So your hand is up. I'm gonna unmute yourself. And maybe Marilyn, Carol.
Okay, there we go. I thought I had. Okay, let's try this again. First of all, Janet, I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. I read your book. It's been many years, but I so admire you. And I envy the fact that you hear God so easily. Something that I've experienced once, but it's marvelous that you are so tuned into God. Your statement, your description, which I know you use in your book, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but standing at
spiritual position of attention.
Spiritual position of attention. I think as Christian Scientists, we have a sense of what you mean, but if you had to explain that to a non-scientist, how would you explain that?
Well, I explain, what it's like in the military to come to a position of attention. You're not talking, you are listening, and you are making sure that you understand what the person is saying to you, and you're obeying what they're telling you to do. And, just comparing it to what it's like for a soldier to be at a position of attention, and that it takes trust, because if God is love, then he's not ever going to tell you do something that would be harmful to you or anything like that. You kind of have to get their confidence up in that they do need to listen and that they need to be obedient. Mhm.
Okay, thank you. I'll let someone else jump in. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good question, Heather. Marilyn Keller, let's go to you next, and then we'll do
Right.
Ken you after Marilyn.
Hey, thank you so much. That was very inspiring. Thank you for all your years of service and all the good that you've done. I've not actually been a chaplain, just been very supportive to all the work going on, and just very supportive. I want to know if they cross the line. Is it women mainly are chaplain to other women, or can they cross the line, women be chaplain to men and vice versa?
Well, in the military, you're the chaplain for everybody in your unit. And so there are larger numbers of men than women, but I find it interesting that even the Muslims ask if I would come and talk to their people. So it was interesting. I made sure that when I said the prophet's name, I said, peace be upon him. And I did all the things you're supposed to do. I really read the Quran. And so afterwards, 4 of the Muslim imams came up afterwards and they said, we want to shake your hand. And I said, oh, I wouldn't want you to have to cross over the border of your behavior restrictions. And I said that I know that wouldn't be something that they would want you to do. And they said, no, we want to shake your hand. And they insisted, they just kept insisting. And so the 4 of them lined up, and I just stood there and I put my hands out like this, and they put their hands on my hands, and they bowed and they said, peace be upon you. But when I said it back, peace be upon you, I asked them afterwards, I said, what was it that made you want to do that? And they said, because we've never even heard a lifetime Muslim say the prophet's name and peace be upon you with the reverence that we heard in your voice. So I think, when your tone, the sincerity that comes across to people, I think that's so important to them.
Yes, thank you. Your love definitely shines through.
You're very kind.
Thank you, Marilyn. Ken, let's go to you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. It's been a privilege to hear your thoughts. We are one of those that David mentioned that has a challenge getting into they'll give us a slot, but they want our service to be, they call it fundamentalist or something. They want it to be stripped of anything that would be controversial. So, you can do that. You can do forgiveness. You can do, base it on, but have you encountered that where it's not a person asking for a Christian Science service, so you have to give a generic service? Have you encountered that kind of approach, and do you just try to stick to something very general that nobody could argue with? Because certainly we're not going to preach that man is a sinner, or that God, Jesus is God. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, that's in the military, that's very common, where they want you to come and give what they call a general Protestant service. And so I always make sure that I'm staying with the biblical topic. But I also find that if I give them examples of, like when the chaplain spit on me and how we have to believe that the teachings that Jesus taught are still as powerful today. And, talk about, hugging the man and him falling to his knees or stuff like that, or the coyotes, got up and left and stuff like that. I even talked to the Women's Chaplains Conference just a few years ago, and it was 3 days, and all the women speakers that they had, famous women, and all from that DC area. I was the very last person before everybody was going to leave to get on the airplane, or their airplanes, and I shared my experiences and how love was the very basis of everything we do. And the people who sponsored it came up afterwards and they said, oh, and I should say, every single woman came up and said, now I think I know how to deal with hatred, because I had so many examples that I'd shared with them of how the hatred was just completely nullified. And with the biblical passage, with showing them, how you live that. And they all said, I think we know how to navigate this now. And they all wanted a copy of my book. So I think when we can show that, it's Christian, I always talk about how Christian Science means is that these aren't just, things that you read, they're actually practical and applicable. And that's what we're applying, those very powerful teachings of Jesus, and that they're just as healing today, that he's as much a full service savior today. I like to use that term, that he's as much a full service savior today as he was when he walked the earth. And to not
Thank you so much.
underestimate, the impact of what he taught.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
So Janet, that sounded to me like, if I could summarize what you just said, that yes, you were asked to give a general Protestant type of service, but you still brought your own lived life experiences to that conversation. Is that right?
Right. But I always linked them to the biblical passages that they were linked to and the concept.
I got a question for you, Janet. If it got 25, 30, 40 more Christian Scientists into prison who are just willing to share something along the lines of a general Protestant style service, would that be a good thing in your view?
Well, we
As a
go
starting
into
point?
Christian Science services, and we started with one person in our because that's who had requested a Christian Science service. And then when I spoke in the big room, more people started coming and more people started coming. And so I think sometimes we had 20 or 30 even. And they kept asking me to come back and speak in the big room too. But I just think the more you can help them to understand the precepts are actually applicable today. They're not just nice things that you hear. And the other thing that comes up a lot in those discussions is there are things in the Old Testament that, we will always abide by, the 10 Commandments, and I list that. I say, but think about how many times Jesus quoted something in the Old Testament. Love your enemy, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemy. I talked about how, we're never going to let go of those 10 Commandments, but there's so many beautiful stories in there too. But there are some precepts that we have to look at where Jesus advanced things. And so, but I try to get them to understand that that was hundreds of years earlier when those things were written, and how much they actually advanced thought at that time. because, you know, if you look at those 10 commandments, you know, love your neighbor, don't commit murder, you know, you can go right down them. Those were advances in thought. And so they were a phenomenal advancement of thought. And then Jesus came along and took another great big step with thought. And so we don't disregard the Old Testament, but we certainly question passages that say kill the women, the sheep, the goat, the infants, and you know, what's called divine command morality, and that's, you know, utterly kill everything that opposes you. And so that we have to look at what Jesus said when he said, you've heard this been said, but I say unto you. So you have to kind of get them to understand that you're not throwing out the whole Old Testament, but that it was a wonderful and great big advance at that time, and that Jesus just took them a whole nother big step forward. And you know, that each prophet took them a step forward as you look at the different books the prophets wrote or, you know, talked about. They didn't write them at that time, but yeah.
That sounds a little bit like something you might learn in seminary, some of that stuff you're talking about right now. Is that right?
No, I kind of invented those.
Ah, okay.
The more I studied them and understood what, you know, I mean, the seminary helped you understand all of that, but then I knew what I could tell them.
Mhm.
So
Sam, I see you have a hand up.
I'm sorry. Oh,
Sam.
Sam, okay.
Hi, Janet. I'll join with everybody else and say thank you for sharing. My question is that what I'm hearing you say is that as well-intentioned as any of us might be and enthusiastic to help others, in particular, in this case, people returning to general society, what I hear you saying is we really need to be well-versed in our own study of Christian Science and why we're studying Christian Science, so that similar to the instructions in an airplane, get your own oxygen mask on first before you attempt even to help anybody else.
That's a good example. Yeah.
That's what I hear you saying. We have to be well-versed in the spiritual message of the Bible. Otherwise, well, if we do, then we too can answer the tough questions when they come up, when the storms come to our house. That's
Right.
what I'm asking. Am I hearing you?
I think that's a very nice explanation of it. Yes.
Awesome.
You know, I'm going to jump in quickly, Gabriel, excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do I understand, am I reading subtext that you didn't mean, but I think you were implying that is leaving Christian Science out of the preaching in the prisons really something that we want to do in the long run? Shouldn't there be some the ability to include Christian Science in some way, even though we're asked? I'm not an in-person chaplain, I'm a corresponding, but doesn't that dilute what we're really trying to do in the prisons? And how do we get around that? I'm just going to leave it to you.
Yeah, I guess each state has its own rules, and in here in Florida, unless an inmate requests a specific tradition come in and give that kind of service, they're not going to have you in there, because there's, like I said, there's 200 and some just Protestant. There isn't even room to put 276 different Protestant services in any prison that I know of. You know, they've got one big room and a few other small rooms. And so what we pray about is that if there is someone who wants to know the truth, that God will provide that opportunity for us to bring the truth. That, you know, we're there to bring the truth to these people.
And my suggestion was really more exploring the idea of, if we have a sincere desire to serve and to bring the stories of the Bible, the stories of Jesus, these teachings to people, being willing and open to serve in whatever way we might be called or have an opportunity to do so, and then to also bring that Christian Science perspective as well. So I'm not saying cut that out completely, but I think, Janet, you make a perfect, awesome point, which is without a specific request for a Christian Science specific service, if our chaplains and our volunteers are saying, well, I'm only going to go in, only myself, if somebody asks me to come in there, versus, hey, I'd like to establish a relationship with the head chaplain at an institution and say, how can I be of help? How can I be of service to you? Because we talked to.
That's many times how you get in, is if you have a relationship with that head chaplain, they ask you to come and talk with the larger group.
Mhm.
And then, you can mention Christian Science.
And we've heard this before.
Usually
as well.
introduced as a Christian Scientist, yeah.
Exactly. And that's just an opening of thought, I think, that I'm encouraging us all to consider. Not to say, forget what you know and believe. It's really what literally are some of the first human footsteps to even get in the door sometimes. Do we have any other questions for Janet tonight?
Can I say
Oh,
one
go ahead. Yeah, please
thing?
do.
It relates to what you said. One of the things I always try to get out very early is that the term science and Christian Science is with a capital S. And so it means it's truth with a capital T, and that it refers to the truth of the Bible. And that it's not science and physical sciences or biology or anything like that. That's to me one of the most important aspects to get people to understand up front.
Okay. Looks like Marilyn maybe had one other question, a follow-up maybe.
Oh, just one other statement that's really inspiring to what you just said. I'm a big fan of astrophysicist Lawrence Doyle, and some of his colleagues have asked him, is he trying to make science into Christianity? And he says, no, he's trying to point out that Christianity is scientific. So that underscores what you just said. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard him say that too. I like that.
Also, Janet, earlier, I think when we were trying to get connected, somebody shared a link to prayerfullivingshop.com/BK-Horton. Is that a good place to buy your book? Or is there
Yes, they have like 400 of them right now.
I'm going to paste that link again in the chat for anybody who would like a copy of your book. Definitely recommend you check that out. I know it's been very inspiring to a lot of people, Janet.
Thank you. One thing I'd like to note is that I don't keep the income on that because I think they usually sell it for about $20. So I think $10 is what we have to pay to have it printed and get it out there. So anything that is made on it, they'll send it to me and I send it to the mother church.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
I also wanted to just remind everybody before we wrap up, if you got a forwarded copy of an email to this meeting and you're not on the email list, you are more than welcome to subscribe, and you can always duck out anytime. I'll paste the URL for that as well. Oh, and it looks like, yeah, Keith was saying that you might save almost $12 on the book right now. So this is the link to subscribe to our email list. We interview somebody every month, like Janet, or somebody from another organization focused on reentry or on prison ministry work. We're trying to learn every single month how to get better at this work, how to open our hearts broader, how to make more of an impact. And we just welcome all of you on the call tonight to consider both metaphysically how you might support this work, including the types of things that Janet talked about tonight, as well as what we're doing and hoping to do in the
Hey,
future.
Gabriel.
Yeah.
Could I ask Janet a quick question before we go?
Yeah, go for it.
Janet, you mentioned a couple of times about truth, and I know that's the big topic a lot of times, along with love and some of the big topics. But I wanted to ask, when exactly did you develop your firm conviction of truth, your firm conviction in the scriptures, and how did you go about doing that? I'm sure it probably started pretty early or a long time ago, but how does one go about developing that firm conviction of truth that the scriptures are really real?
Well, for me, I was 5 years old when I came in the bathroom and found my mother bleeding to death in the bathtub. And my dad had just met Mrs. Dill, who was the woman who introduced us to Christian Science, because my dad was 6'4". She was about maybe 5'2". And he was about 265 pounds, and I have no idea what, but she was teeny. And he was lipping off to her. And she stood up to him and she said, "You need to understand this is not the man you are." And she said, "I've seen you with your little girl." And she said, "That's the man you are and the man you need to be." And my dad was never lippy after that and everything. And then that's when we found my mother bleeding to death. He took her, she wanted to go to her doctor because she'd been a Catholic growing up. But she said, "You tell that blank Christian Science practitioner she can pray for me till I get to Doc Hanson's office." And so Mrs. Dill prayed for her. And by the time she got to Doc Hanson's office, she was covered in blood, and there was blood all over the blankets we had around her and in the car and everything. But the doctor said, "You have a perfect blood count." And Mom even said, "I'm perfectly fine now." So that was pretty.
That had an effect on you, that like a big effect even at 5 years old?
Well, you don't doubt something like that when you've seen it with your own eyes.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Can we all give Janet a big round of applause? I was just really
that.
well,
Thank
especially
you
for getting through the technical issues that we had in the beginning of the call. Really good. Also, I'm going to paste in the link for the conference registration page. I encourage everybody to check it out. If you have ever thought about becoming a Christian Science chaplain, a visiting volunteer, or a corresponding volunteer, there are institutional groups in almost every state, well, about half of them actually, that will help you take the steps. And we also work in direct partnership with pretty much all of them to help provide some training as well as guidance. On our website, we've got some videos that are some introduction to both written chaplaincy work and volunteering in that way, as well as in-person chaplaincy work. We'd love to see all of you at the conference, either in person in Dallas. That's again, May 3rd and 4th, or on Zoom. And we're going to have a lot better Zoom participation this year. We've got Eddie Cox, who will be our technical support for that and resource. And if any of you know him, he is an awesome wizard at that. So anyways, really looking forward to seeing you all again in the future. This talk will be available as a replay. Again, sign up on our email list and you'll get a link to that as soon as it's posted. Or you can email me directly, gabriel@embracedfully.org, and I will send you a link once it's up. So just want to say thank you again for everybody. Thank you, David, for that excellent interview.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet, for the excellent interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank